one of the things that I've been enjoying about the series that we're doing right now is it's given me a chance to dive into a few of my heroes in the Bible and read some of their stories again and reacquaint myself with their life. Today, actually, we're going to be talking about one that is probably one of my very favorite Bible stories. And when I say call it Bible story, it's a very important piece of history as well. And to me, there are just some people in the Bible that are standout people. They sort of stand head and shoulders above others. Their character, their quality of their decisions, their life is above average. And so the one we're going to be talking about today is Nehemiah. And if you happen to have your Bible with you, it would be good to just open that up. And we're going to really be paging through some verses through the first 6 chapters of the book of Nehemiah, and reading a few sections as we go. And I want to read chapter 1 to you, just because it kind of sets in place what the scenario is in Jerusalem. And even though the chapter 1 doesn't take place in Jerusalem, Jerusalem is what the subject matter is about. And so let's begin with verse 1 of chapter 1 in Nehemiah. It says, "The words of Nehemiah, son of Hakaliah, in the month of Kislev, in the 20th year, while I was in the citadel of Susa, Hanani, one of my brothers, came from Judah with some other men, and I questioned them about the Jewish remnant that survived the exile, and also about Jerusalem. They said to me, 'Those who survived the exile and are back in the province are in great trouble and disgrace. The wall of Jerusalem is broken down, and its gates have been burned with fire.' When I heard these things, I sat down and wept. For some days I mourned and fasted and prayed before the God of heaven. Then I said," and it's very important what he says to God here, "O Lord God of heaven, the great and awesome God, who keeps his covenant of love with those who love him and obey his commands, let your ear be attentive and your eyes open to hear the prayer your servant is praying before you day and night, for your servants, the people of Israel. I confess the sins we Israelites, including myself and my father's house, have committed against you." And notice Nehemiah he was praying in a confession, and he was confessing for the sins of Israel, but he included himself and his father's house in this. He didn't omit himself. "We have acted very wickedly toward you. We have not obeyed the commandments, or the commands, decrees, and laws you gave your servant Moses. Remember the instruction you gave your servant Moses, saying, 'If you are unfaithful, I will scatter you among the nations. But if you return to me and obey my commands, then even if your exiled people are at the farthest horizon, I will gather them from there and bring them to the place where I have chosen as a dwelling for my name. They are your servants and your people, whom you redeemed by your great strength and your mighty hand. O Lord, let your ear be attentive to the prayer of this your servant, and to the prayer of your servants who delight in revering your name. Give your servant success today by granting him favor in the presence of this man. I was cupbearer to the king.'" Now, if you're familiar at all with a cupbearer was the person who tasted everything that the king was going to eat or drink. And if he lived, then the king would eat it. So there was sort of a downside to being the cupbearer, in the sense that if someone was trying to poison the king, they were going to die for the king instead of the king dying. That was a downside. There was an upside to being the cupbearer of a king. And that means if you think about how many times you go to the refrigerator for a drink, or this guy got to know the king very well. I mean, it's almost like he lives with the king, everything. So he knew the king's ups, he knew the king's downs, he knew the king's likes, the king's dislikes. And so even though he was someone from that had been taken captive, and he had made it to this position, this high position, but tough position. And so that's where Nehemiah was. He was the cupbearer to the king. Today's title is Using Life's Blocks to Keep on Building. And by blocks, I mean roadblocks, really. Things that are in your way, something that is blocking you from moving forward. There are different names, different words that are used for something like that. Roadblocks is one. You might hear someone say, I feel like I got a mountain in front of me, and I don't have any way to go forward. I feel like that I've got kind of an impossible situation here, and I'm not sure what to do. So using those difficult, hard things that show up in front of us, using them instead of looking at it as there's no way to go forward, taking that and using it as a building block in what God is doing in our lives. Now, I also want to say this. There are times whenever a roadblock does mean stop and go another way. I don't think we should try to go over every mountain or move every mountain or find a way around it or whatever. And I don't think we should put every roadblock in another place. Sometimes it is a stopping place for us. But if you let's just look at a few scenarios here. Let's just say that you're facing a financial crisis. I don't believe God wants you to throw up your hands and just give up. I think he wants you to look at what's in front of you and say, I may not totally know how to handle that right now, but I'm going to ask God for wisdom and guidance, and I'm going to ask him how to take this difficult thing that I have, either called debt or a setback of some kind, and I'm going to try to see what God's going to lead me to and through, and using this block as somehow a building, something to build in my life. It could be a relationship. Sometimes people despair when a relationship goes south or a relationship ends. And I just want to tell you, that's a very harsh and very difficult thing. And I don't mention it in a light manner at all. But what I would say is that does not necessarily equate the end of the road for you or that everything is over. And so God wants to help you figure out how to take that block that is just interfering with your life and make something useful from that. If you have children, sometimes we might feel like that is just too big of a job for me. You might feel like you're facing a task that's just too big for you. Just want to tell you, if God is giving you those children, he's going to give you a way to raise those children and to make that happen. And so whatever you might feel like is a roadblock to you today, I want you to just pay close attention. You won't have all the roadblocks Nehemiah had. I hope you don't have all of them in your lifetime, but you probably will have some, or you probably have had some, or you might have one or two right now in front of you. And so let's look at these. From chapter 1, we find roadblock number 1, and that is that Nehemiah hears about a hopeless situation. The hopeless situation was that there were people who were left in Jerusalem as a remnant whenever everybody had been taken into captivity, and or not everybody, but many have been taken into captivity. Whenever Jerusalem walls were knocked down, and they were they were also the gates were burned, so they had access. Anybody had access to the city, and so as a result, it looked like there was a very hopeless situation. In fact, it seemed so hopeless that Nehemiah wept and cried when he heard about the condition of the situation. And so Jerusalem lies in ruins, is what he had heard. Now, Nehemiah did have a response to this. If you have your Bibles in front of you, if not, you can maybe follow. They're trying to follow along with me as I'm sketching through here in chapter 2. Let's look at verse 3, if we would, just for a moment. At verse 3 in chapter 2, he says, I said to the king, may the king live forever. Why should my face not look sad when the city where my fathers are buried lies in ruins and its gates have been destroyed by fire? So he's had a conversation with the king. The king's not used to seeing Nehemiah downcast, and he asks him about it, and Nehemiah says, this is why. this is why I'm upset. This is why I'm emotionally down. This is why I feel depressed. This is why I'm upset. It's because of the fact that the city where my fathers are buried lies in ruins and its gates have been burned. And so then, if you look at the next two verses, you'll see the response that Nehemiah has to this roadblock. He said, the king said to me, what is it you want? Then I prayed to the God of heaven, and I answered the king. If it pleases the king, and if your servant has found favor in his sight, let him send me to the city in Judah where my fathers are buried so that I can rebuild it. He says, allow me to go and to rebuild this. This looks like a very desperate, difficult situation. I can't stand the thoughts of this going on, but I am willing to go back and rebuild this. Now, I don't know if you are facing a situation that seems a little bit overwhelming or a little hopeless to you, or if you if you are going through something that seems very, very difficult. But what I want to tell you is that one of the things that will help you as you approach that seemingly impossible situation is to remember this, to remember that God says what is impossible with man is possible with him. And so our trust is not in what is impossible. Our trust is in the God who is able to make what is impossible possible. If you notice Nehemiah here, he prayed and asked God for wisdom as he was talking to the king. And his confidence was not in himself. His confidence was in God. And so I want to encourage you as you look at an impossible situation to say, with God's help, this is what I plan to do. This is what I'm willing to do. This is what I will do. And begin to take steps in the process of moving forward. And Nehemiah said, I will rebuild it. Now, I also know this, and that is when people have an addiction, oftentimes that addiction feels like something impossible to overcome. And one of the best things that can ever happen to someone with an addiction is to actually feel like it's impossible for them to overcome. And literally to say, I can't do anything about that. Drew, what is step number 1 in the 12 steps? Oh, thank you. Say it again. Say it out loud. Admitting that we're powerless. And your life is becoming manageable. I'm sorry to put you on the spot like that, Drew. But I know there's people here that know it, okay? We get it out there one way. But one of the best places to start recovery is admitting we really can't do it. Admitting this is too big for me. This is beyond me. That is the best place to start. Not only in recovery, that's true for anything that we're facing that's difficult, that's harsh, that's hard, that seems impossible. Is to say, you know what? From a human standpoint, this literally looks impossible. And I think Nehemiah, if you look at his situation, the hope that he had was this. If you notice in his prayer, he said, God, if we would repent and we'd turn back to you, you have said you would bring us from the four corners of the earth, so to speak, and bring us back together. And so he knew there was a promise in there. And I just want to tell you, when God gives you a responsibility, he also with that gives you the ability to face into the wind and move forward with it. And Nehemiah said, if you give me permission, I'll go back and rebuild. Now, does that mean he understood everything that he was going to do and every piece of that? No. He just knew he'd commit himself to do what he could do in an impossible situation with God's help. Now, roadblock number 2 is also found in chapter 2, and that is that he had resistance. He had resistance. Don't think if you set out to do something to overcome something difficult, don't think everybody's going to be your fan. Don't think everybody's going to encourage you. In fact, you're going to have a lot of people who will naysay to you. I know there have been situations where someone said, hey, I'm going to, and I'm just using this example, I'm not even saying this is what anybody should do, but just like, I'm going to go back to school and I'm going to do this. I'm going to become this. And sometimes there will be people who feel like if they do that, I'm going to get left behind. Now, they don't say that. Nobody would have the gall to walk up and go, well, if you do that, I'm going to feel like a born loser. You're going to advance beyond me. Could you just stay in the same place I am? But there are times when people will try to hold somebody back from whatever it is they're doing because they feel like they're going to move into a new level with regard to something, and they're going to feel left behind. And what I want to say to you is, don't be surprised. Let's just say that you set out on a venture. You set out to accomplish something. You set out to do something. You set out to be the best mom, best dad you can be. Don't think. I can tell you who will discourage you a little bit on that right off the bat. It'll be your own kids. They're not going to say, oh, you'll never be the best dad or the best mom in the world. They're just going to go, that sounds like work to me. Because if you're going to be a really good mom, that means you're going to discipline me. That means you're going to make me clean my room. That means you're going to make me learn some things. That means you're going to, and it's like, do you think kids really want you to do that? Well, they're glad when they're adults you did. But when you're growing up, they're not super excited about that at all. So a lot of times the resistance, happens early on, the minute you start making some changes. So Nehemiah, he goes to Jerusalem, and he's headed that direction. Verse 10, it says, when Sanballat, the Horonite, and Tobiah, the Ammonite official, heard about this, they were very much disturbed that someone had come to promote the welfare of the Israelites. The reason they were upset is because they were taking total advantage of the situation the Israelites found themselves in. They had the Israelites right where they wanted them, and they were able to financially and power-wise, everything else, take absolute advantage of the situation. So this wasn't good news to them. This wasn't anything that was making them. In fact, they were very much disturbed that someone was coming to help the Israelites. They were bothered by it. And you'll hear more about these guys a little bit later. Let me just tell you, everybody will not be happy about the progress you are making or that you plan to make. Not everybody will celebrate it. Not everybody, because your progress might feel like a threat to someone else. It can happen. And fortunately, it doesn't happen for everybody, but it does happen. Let's look at Nehemiah's response to these guys not being too happy about it. In verses 17 and 18 of chapter 2, says this, then I said to them, you see the trouble, and he's talking about the people in Jerusalem, the Jewish people. He says, you see the trouble we are in. Jerusalem lies in ruins, and its gates have been burned with fire. Come, let us rebuild the wall of Jerusalem, and we will no longer be in disgrace. I also told them about the gracious hand of my God upon me and what the king had said to me. They replied, let us start building. So they began this good work. Let us start. The people got excited, and he told them what he was planning on doing, and they got excited and said, let's do this good work. Let's get with it. And so even though there was some resistance, even though there were some people not happy, Nehemiah did not let that stop him from going ahead with this good work. Now, roadblock number 3. He was falsely accused. Look at verse 19 of chapter 2. It says, when Sanballat, the Horonite, Tobiah, the Ammonite, I told you you'd be hearing about these guys, an Ammonite official, and Geshem, the Arab, heard about it, they mocked and ridiculed us. What is this you are doing, they asked. Are you rebelling against the king? In other words, oh, so you're starting a separatist group from the Babylonian kingdom. You're gonna start your own thing. You're gonna be independent of the government. And so they were accused of having bad motives. They were accused of trying to go to undermine the kingdom. And so in this response, you see verse 20, here's what Nehemiah says. I answered them by saying, the God of heaven will give us success. We, his servants, will start rebuilding, but as for you, you have no share in Jerusalem or any claim or any historic right to it. And so rather than directly answering their question, saying, getting in an argument with it, he just stated the truth about the situation. God is going to give us success, and you have no part of what we're doing here. This is something God has ordained for us as his people. And so Nehemiah said, God will give us success. And I want to tell you, whenever you ever have your motives challenged, whenever someone says, well, I know why you're doing that. You're just looking out for yourself, or you're just doing this, or you're trying to get yourself in a position for this, or you're trying to, when people question our motives, that can hurt pretty deeply. You can even have a stranger question your motive, and it can hurt pretty deeply. You know, I found out something some years ago when I had a situation where I was beginning to go to prison some and do some visiting. And one of the things that I found out was I had been used to, in my earlier years, if I showed up at a jail or a prison, that I would just show them my credentials, and they would, you know, let me go on in if at all possible and visit with somebody. And I can remember the very first time that I showed them my credentials, and they said, anybody could make those up. And I said, well, sir, I didn't make these up. This is not made up. I had to literally go on the web and show them my picture at the church here to prove to them that I'm actually a pastor of a church, and had to go through an amazing amount of challenges to be able to visit. Well, initially, that kind of hurt my feelings a little bit. Like, I mean, you know, I'm trying to do something decent here and good, and you're questioning, you know, my motives and what I'm. But what I began to find out was, with the internet being what it is, a lot of people can buy ordination papers for about $15 off of the internet, and there were people coming in with ordination papers and smuggling, because they were being let in lightly because they were a pastor. And they were smuggling goods into the. So all of a sudden, I realized this wasn't about. They weren't criticizing me. They were realizing people had figured out that jails and prisons trust pastors, and so that's a way we can get in. And people were circumventing this process because of that. And right currently, I'm been in a month process in a situation trying to get a pass. And as a pastor, and I'm just going to tell you, it's not what it used to be, folks, and it's because people have abused the system. Well, initially, that made me feel bad. It made me feel like you're judging my motives. Like, what are you? But the truth of the matter was, people have misused the system. So now they have to make people. You have to go through a lot of process to prove that you're really who you're saying you are. A piece of paper by itself is not going to get it. So he was falsely accused, but he said, God will give us success. And really what he's saying by that is, Sanballat and Tobiah, my success is not based on your resistance. My success is based on God's power. And when you're facing difficulties, you need to understand the thing that you're facing is not going to determine the outcome. God is, if you're trusting him, the one who's going to determine the outcome. And we have to be willing to commit ourselves to that. I don't think Nehemiah had all the answers yet. Some of this story was being written as he went, but he knew his next step. He knew where he was going. Roadblock number 4. He was insulted, and he was put down. Jump over to chapter 4, if you would, with me, and look at the first 3 verses. It says, when Sanballat heard that we were rebuilding the wall, he became angry and was greatly incensed. He ridiculed the Jews, and in the presence of his associates and the army of Samaria, he said, what are these feeble Jews doing? Will they restore their wall? Will they offer sacrifices? Will they finish in a day? Can they bring the stones back to life from those heaps of rubble, burned as they are? Tobiah the Ammonite, who was at his side, said, what are they building? What they are building, if even a fox climbed up on it, he would break down their wall of stones. So there's this intimidation, this making fun of, this insulting. And I don't know if you've ever experienced somebody putting you down before, but it's not a great thrill. And I've noticed this with children sometimes. There's some kids, someone puts them down, it seems like it kind of washes off of them, like, well, who are you? It doesn't matter what you say. And they kind of just go on. But I've watched also, there are other kids who will crumble at the first time that someone makes fun of what they're doing or puts them down for what they're doing. And the peer pressure of that just causes them to kind of cave in. And then they don't want to do anything, and they're scared to do anything, whatever. That's what these guys were hoping would happen to Nehemiah and the Israelites, is they just make fun of them. Just make fun of their feeble efforts, and what they were going to do. And even if they did build something, it could be knocked down by a fox running on top of it. And so here they were being ridiculed and put down. Here's Nehemiah's response. Look at verse 4. Verse 4 says, hear us, O God, for we are despised. Turn their insults back on their own heads. Give them over as plunder in a land of captivity. Do not cover up their guilt or blot out their sins from your sight, for they have thrown insults in the face of the builders. So we rebuilt the wall till all it reached half its height, for the people worked with all their heart. So what Nehemiah did was he prayed, he talked to God about it, and they worked. He prayed and he worked. And you know what? That's a pretty good recipe for about anything. Do everything you can do and pray like everything you do doesn't matter, that it's all up to God. Pray like everything matters and is on God, but also work like as if it all depended on you. You put that combination together of you giving your greatest and best efforts and you praying and believing that God will do what you can't do, great things can happen. And that's exactly what Nehemiah did. He put that combination together. Now, roadblock number 5 is the enemy plotted to fight. I think at this point the enemy was going, these guys aren't being so easily intimidated. We've said a lot of things. It seems like they're going right on ahead with what they're going to do. And so let's threaten them. So they threatened them. Chapter 4, verse 7, it says, when Sanballat, Tobiah, the Arabs, the Ammonites, and the men of Ashdod heard that the repairs to Jerusalem's walls had gone ahead and that the gaps were being closed, they were angry. They all plotted together to come and fight against Jerusalem and stir up trouble against it. Troublemakers. And they said, you know what? So what we've been saying hasn't stopped them, hasn't put them down. So maybe we just need to go out there and fight them, because we think they'll run. We show up in some army equipment, and so they were threatened that they were going to be attacked. And let me just tell you, Nehemiah, let's look at what he did. Verse 9. Verse 9 says this, but we prayed to our God and posted a guard day and night to meet this threat. Going back, prayed and worked. Prayed and worked. He didn't stop what he was doing, but he did act with some wisdom and say, we're going to put a guard up so that we know when someone's coming. So he put up these guards to let them know. He prayed and he prepared. He got ready in case they were attacked. But he didn't stop working. They kept on working. And then roadblock number 6. Now this one right here is the one that may be the hardest in a sense on us. Because sometimes we can fight against external forces. Sometimes we can see that as our enemy and we push against that. But whenever things start happening internally, that's whenever we start breaking down. And so roadblock number 6 is people were tired, they were scared, and they were discouraged. Has anybody ever met the enemy, discouragement? Have you ever met that enemy before? Okay, I'm glad none of you guys have. but I have. I saw, I think, 2 hands. So I'm going to actually, when we're done here, I'm going to come sit in the front row, and I want you one by one to come up and tell me how to never be discouraged, okay? So you guys, that is awesome. I knew you guys were awesome. I didn't know you were that awesome. So they were tired, scared, and discouraged. Look at verses 10 to 12 in this chapter 4. It says, meanwhile, the people in Judah said, the strength of the laborers is giving out, and there is so much rubble that we cannot rebuild the wall. You hadn't heard anybody saying we can't do it up to this point, did you? But here they're going, we can't, the strength's gone. We've been working hard, and we can't do it. Also, our enemies said, ooh, somebody had been listening to the enemies. Before they know it or see us, we will be right there among them, and we will kill them and put an end to the work. Then the Jews who lived near them came and told us 10 times over, wherever you turn, they will attack us. So you talk about a group of people who've been working hard, trying hard, and at this point they're going, we're not going to make a grade. We're not doing it fast enough. We're not doing it good enough. We're not doing it smart enough. And so they're going to get us. They're going to kill us. And it just might as well throw in the towel now. Now I want to have you listen and look at what Nehemiah says in response to this. Verses 13 to 15. He says this, therefore I stationed some of the people behind the lowest points of the wall of the exposed places, at the exposed places, posting them by families with their swords, spears, and bows. Now, there's a lot of wisdom, a lot of things, and I can't go into every detail here, but if you put me beside my family with some fighting gear, and you put me down by a place in the wall where I don't know the people that well, where am I going to fight the hardest and the best? Where my family is, right? Not that I don't care about anybody else, but I'm gonna give the best fight yet when it comes to my family. And so Nehemiah is exercising a tremendous amount of wisdom here. He's placing people by their families, and giving them swords, spears, and bows, and at the places where the wall's most vulnerable. And after I looked things over, I stood up and said to the nobles, the officials, and the rest of the people, don't be afraid of them. Remember the Lord, who is great and awesome, and fight for your brothers, your sons and your daughters, your wives, and your homes. Now, I want you to particularly look at verse 15. When our enemies heard that we were aware of their plot and that God had frustrated it, we all returned to the wall, each to his own work. Now, Nehemiah, he didn't play stupid. You know, when these people said, listen, they're going to kill us, man. He's going, look, they might, but not without a fight. So here's the deal. We didn't like how things were before. We want a preferred future. So here's what let's do. Let's get everybody armed. Let's get everybody armed. And let's make sure that everybody is ready to fight. And I tell you what I'm going to do, Mr. So-and-so. I'm going to make sure you and your family are right here together, and you fight like everything depended on the rescue of your family. And you do the same thing. And you do the same thing. And he went along and he encouraged them to do this. And then he said, I think we've forgotten one thing. I think we've forgotten the Lord, who is great and awesome. Who is great and awesome. Don't raise your hand on this, but have you ever forgotten the Lord, who is great and awesome? Because if you look at yourself and you look at your own strength and you look at your own lineup, I'm sure this group of people looked like a pretty tag team army. I mean, they had families in the mix. This was not your regular army strategy. Okay, this was a little bit ragtag. But I'm going to tell you that a ragtag army with God is always enough. And in this situation, Nehemiah reminded them, you fight your hardest, you fight your best, but remember the Lord, who is great and awesome. Now, he said that about God more than once. So there's something that tells me Nehemiah had this amazing confidence that God was great. His theology was right about God. He was great and he was awesome. And, I heard someone say one time, don't use the word awesome for anyone but God. Well, I don't know that we ought to make that a rule, but what I do want to say is nobody is as awesome as God. When you're talking about awesome, he defines it for real. He is the awesome one. And so Nehemiah reminded him this. And so he regrouped them. He gave them permission to keep on working, but be ready to fight. And so they go back to the work again. And roadblock number 7, internal conflict. Internal conflict. Don't raise your hands on this. But I think one of the most discouraging, it's discouraging to be discouraged. But one of the things that will make you really discouraged is whenever your family fights among themselves. There have been a few times, kids, they get that sibling rivalry thing going on. There's been a few times at Father's Day or something, I would just say, the best gift you could give me is for you guys to get along with each other and to treat each other well. That'd be the best gift I would have. That'd be the best gift I could have. And internal conflict within our families it really hurts, and it's hard, and it's difficult. And they developed this internal conflict in Jerusalem. And it wasn't real pretty either. I'm going to read chapter 5, the first 5 verses. It says, now the men and their wives raised a great outcry against their Jewish brothers. Some were saying, we and our sons and daughters are numerous. In order for us to eat and stay alive, we must get grain. Others were saying, we are mortgaging our fields, our vineyards, and our homes to get grain during the famine. Still others were saying, we have had to borrow money to pay the king's tax on our fields and vineyards, although we are of the same flesh and blood as our countrymen, and though our sons are as good as theirs, yet we have to subject our sons and daughters to slavery. Some of our daughters have already been enslaved, but we are powerless because our fields and our vineyards belong to others. Here's what had basically happened. There were people in Jerusalem there who had more than other people had, and in most economies, and that's understandable, and that's the way things are. But right in the middle of everybody having to put their own lives a little bit on the shelf, they were still trying to survive financially and build this wall. But you had some people who were saying, well, I'll loan you the money for your family to have food and for you to pay your taxes, but I'll take those 2 kids right there, and they'll be my slaves. So they were having to give up their children to be slaves to their own countrymen. And it was creating this tension, this in the family kind of tension that was going on. So I'll just tell you, you can read verses 6 to 8 yourself, but you go on down and read through the rest of this chapter. I won't take the time to read it, but I'm going to tell you what Nehemiah did. He got out a soapbox and he preached, he filleted them pretty good that day. And he said, we'll never accomplish what we need to accomplish for everybody's good unless we work better together. And he just tore right into them. And he told them, it's okay in most cases to loan money and to loan money with interest, but in this case here, you can't take people's kids as slaves, and you can't do this to each other because it's undermining everything that we're trying to accomplish here. And so he set it right. He made wrongs right. And here's another thing that had happened. This is something Nehemiah talks about too. When they got there, he had money to buy all the Jewish people who had been sold into slavery, to buy them back in slavery to foreigners in that area, and bought them back. And now he said, we did that and now you're enslaving each other. This is not good. And so he helped them set what was wrong right, and they did it. They agreed to do it, and they did it. Now, internal conflict is probably one of the ugliest conflicts that there is. And it's very, very important that it is dealt with, and Nehemiah dealt with it straight on and set things right. Roadblock number 8, intimidation and distraction and insinuations. Have you ever had anybody, don't raise your hand, have you had anybody insinuate something about you? It's one thing from, just judge your motive. Insinuate. And this was going on with a lot of distraction, a lot of intimidation. So if you would, I want to read Nehemiah chapter 16. Now, I'm going to point out a few verses we go through, and this will be the last passage that we read. But follow along with me if you would, begin at verse 1 of Nehemiah chapter 6. It says, when word came to Sanballat, Tobiah, Geshem the Arab, and the rest of our enemies, that I had rebuilt the wall, and not a gap was left in it, though up to that time I had not set the doors and the gates. Sanballat and Geshem sent me this message. Come, let us meet together in one of the villages on the plain of Ono. But they were scheming to harm me. So I sent messengers to them with this reply. This is one of my favorite verses in the Bible. I am carrying on a great project and cannot go down. Why should the work stop while I leave it and go down to you? 4 times they sent me the same message, and each time I gave them the same answer. I am doing a great work for God. I have time to come down and talk to you guys. You guys are against what we're doing anyway. Then the 5th time, Sanballat sent his aide to me with the same message, and in his hand was an unsealed letter in which was written, it is reported among the nations, and Geshem says it's true, that you and the Jews are plotting to revolt, and therefore you are building this wall. Moreover, according to these reports, you're about to become their king, and have even appointed prophets to make this proclamation about you in Jerusalem. There is a king in Judah. Now this report will get back to the king, so come, let us confer together. Sounds like an attorney's letter or something, doesn't it? I was reading that, that one phrase there. Moreover. You read down through it, and, all those hints and forever, I know why lawyers get paid so much, because they learn how to talk a different English language than we do. You have to read it 4 times to know what they're saying, with the dictionary in hand. So he says, this is Nehemiah, I sent him this reply. Nothing like what you are saying is happening. You are just making it up out of your head. I love Nehemiah. He just cuts through. He goes, you just sat there and thought this up and made it up. You know you did. And he knew that they knew that was true. They were all trying to frighten us, thinking their hands will get too weak for the work and it will not be completed. But I prayed, now strengthen my hands. You notice how many times Nehemiah prays through this. Lord, strengthen my hands. One day I went to the house of Shemaiah, son of Deliah, the son of Mehetable, whoever that is, anyway. I know we have some Hebrew people here, and so you can correct me later, Greg, okay? He's a Hebrew linguist. I generally bluff my way through most of them, but a couple of them tangle me up sometimes. Who was shut in at his house, and he said, let us meet in the house of God, inside the temple, and let us close the temple doors, because men are coming to kill you. By night, they're coming to kill you. But that sounded like really spiritual. Let's meet at the house of the Lord. Let's go in and close the door. You'll be safe in the sanctuary. But I said, should a man like me run away? Or should one like me go into the temple to save his life? I will not go. I realized that God had not sent him, but that he had prophesied against me because Tobiah and Sanballat had hired him. He had been hired to intimidate me so that I would commit a sin by doing this, and then they would give me a bad name to discredit me. Remember Tobiah and Sanballat, oh my God, because of what they have done. Remember also the prophetess Noadiah and the rest of the prophets who have been trying to intimidate me. So the wall was completed in the 25th of Elul, in 52 days. When all our enemies heard about this, all the surrounding nations were afraid, lost their self-confidence, because they realized that this work had been done with the help of our God. And I'm going to stop right there. And so all this intimidation, all these situations, Nehemiah had basically two responses. They're saying, come on down, talk to us in the valley here. He said, I'm too busy. I'm too busy doing what God called me to do, to come and sit over here and talk to you guys. I'm too busy. I'm on a mission, and I'm too busy doing that. And then also, whenever he was invited by this so-called spiritual leader to come to the temple and to go in there and hide, I think God gave him tremendous insight. And he's going, and if you notice, he said, why should a man like me go run and hide? I haven't been running and hiding this whole time, have I? Why would I start running and hiding today? You know, I'm here in the name of the Lord. I'm here doing this great work. What I want to tell you is that Nehemiah's boldness was more than just him being a tough guy. He was a tough guy. I have to give it to him. He was a tough guy. But if you notice, all these points along the way, he prays and he asked God to give him strength. He even said there toward the end, even though they were pretty much done with it, and he said, Lord, strengthen my hands. Don't let me get a faint heart and weak arms right now. Let me finish this work. And if you notice, the result of this thing was that this wall was built in 52 days. It was completed in 52 days. Now that's under 2 months. And I got to measuring a little bit and looking at some maps and figuring out, I've been to Jerusalem before, and of course Jerusalem today is different than it was, you know, in that time frame. But it looks like to me at that time frame, probably about 16 miles of wall was rebuilt in less than 2 months. And if you notice, it was all down in rubbles. And they rebuilt this. And what that meant for them, and that was they had some security, and they were able to defend themselves, and they were able to go about their business without being taken advantage of. And so, a couple things I want to say, I guess, in closing is this. What does it take to stop you from doing what it is that God's laid on your heart to do? You know, I think it's normal as a parent, somewhere about the time your kid turns 12, 13, 14, somewhere in there, for your hands to go weak, for your heart to grow faint, for you to feel like this might be too tough for me. But remember, it's a task God's given you. And he will strengthen your hands for the task. You know, I don't know what kind of a mountain looms in front of you. But what I do know is I knew the God who moves mountains. And I see in history, I see in this story of Nehemiah, that he does it in two ways. In a tremendous trust in God's ability to move mountains, and in my willingness to pick up a shovel and start shoveling dirt. And you say, well, if I have to shovel the dirt for that whole mountain, it'll never happen. That's why you're trusting in a God who takes the impossible and makes it possible. Because what I've found, sometimes when I'm shoveling dirt, when I'm doing what I can do, all of a sudden I come upon some treasures, some things that show me how to do it better, how to do it smarter. And there are some times when it seems like my efforts made a whole lot more progress than they should have made on their own because of God's hand being with me. And I just want to tell you, whatever you feel like you face as a roadblock in your life right now, not in every case, because sometimes a roadblock means stop, don't go forward. And sometimes it's a roadblock God puts there. But oftentimes, the roadblock just simply means we need to see and seek out what is it that God would have us to have a response to that. And when we know what our response is, to follow through with faith and to see that roadblock removed on our pathway. Nehemiah, all 8 of these roadblocks happened in 52 days. I mean, this is pretty rapid fire. If you figure that out, that means, every week he was dealing with something that wasn't all that cool. He was dealing with something tough. He was dealing with something hard. Tim, I think in his prayer this morning, was saying, you might have come through something this week, and you might have something this next week. I don't think God ever promised us we wouldn't have some tough challenges. But when he did promise us, he would go with us. And I just want to assure you this morning, whatever battle you're in, you are not in it alone. There's a prayer I pray for my kids sometimes at night, and sometimes if I'm driving them to school in the morning. And I pray this prayer. Lord, they may be Hunter or Skylar, name them by name, and I say, they may some point today feel entirely alone, even though there are people all around them. But I want you to help them remember that they've invited you into their lives and that your spirit lives in them and that they are never alone. Help them to remember they're never alone. And when you are a follower of Jesus, God has placed his spirit in your life. And you're not facing what you're facing alone. God is with you. And when God is with you, mountains can be moved and roadblocks can become building blocks.